And that countdown typically means it's time to dive into another Domo Lunch and Learn. As always, I'm your host, sometimes Mark Booth, but not a lot. To be honest, he's better looking and probably knows way more than I do. So I'm the Domo Director of Community Strategy here, alongside my good friend, Greg Auxier, Manager of Solution Consulting here at Domo. Really excited to provide this session where it may just be more of a kind of a Domo story, but we are going to demo and dive into some things, kind of a little bit of a deep dive. But when Greg and I were talking, we thought, wouldn't it be great just to talk a little bit about how folks can have some ownership over the things that they're doing inside of our product. So Greg is going to dive into that journey and how he really goes about using it for interviewing and getting end users to really buy in on how and what is built. So Greg's a fantastic individual to get to know. We're excited to have. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Eddie, thank you. Appreciate you having me on. I'm excited to be on with everybody, excited for this content to get out into the open. So I'm going to be sharing out some slides. I'm definitely not a death by PowerPoint kind of individual, but we're going to basically just use it to make sure that I'm staying on topic and that we're actually getting after the conversations that we want to do. So yeah, Eddie, can you see my screen okay? Is everything sharing out okay? That says data control versus data awareness.
Absolutely, I can. I'm going to throw that up. But before I do, remember, use the comment section, use the chat wherever you're watching, and ask any question of Greg during this session. He is kind of an open book for the next 20, 30 minutes as we go over providing solutions for ownership in Domo. So excited to hand it over to you, Greg. You are now in charge. Enjoy. I will pop in occasionally if someone has a question, but be sure to use that comment section for any engagement that needs to happen. So if you have a question or you just want to say where you're from, do that right now in the live chat. We appreciate it. All right, Greg, cool. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Eddie. Appreciate it. And welcome everybody out. So when we were going through a couple of different options of things that we wanted to talk about today, one of the things that's really near and dear to my heart and to my developments of what I do inside of Domo. So just so everybody's aware, so I run one of the solution consulting or solution engineering teams here at Domo. So essentially, when you want to be able to extend the Domo platform, better leverage it, get the value out of your investment, our team is essentially an architecture team that wants to be able to help people be able to understand the value of what Domo can really do for them, right? So it's always about impact. It's about getting to the next impactful thing. And because I'm obviously a huge fan of Domo, we use it every day internally as well, right? We eat our own dog food. And so I've always been a natural believer that if you want to be able to get other people to use something, you probably need to use it yourself. And so I've been able to take these massive time investments and talents of multiple people around the Domo organization and bring them to life for the audience of a business audience, right? So I get to work every day with teams around the globe. And so I've been able to pull together data that empowers our customer success team at Domo, our sales team at Domo, our consulting organization, our support organization, you name it. So we basically rolled out a bunch of our assets across the globe. And I wanted to talk about a specific conversation that really kind of hits often and regularly with companies around the world, right? Where really there's two types of conversations that go on. There's data control versus data awareness. And so really in the intro and in the agenda today, so I kind of want to walk through like what my process is going to be. So I'm going to give you a quick intro to me and what makes me so data driven as an individual, as a human being. I'm then going to go into data ownership and the importance of making sure that we set up data pipelines and set up data to be shared out with individuals in a way that is accurate, is real, is something that I can be responsible for and I can govern and have secure. But then dive into the other side of the coin, which is once I'm doing that, I really want to get after who else could this data be valuable to. So I want to talk a little bit about my journey of how this actually started for myself and for my own team at Domo, and how we've been able to roll it out and how we've been able to partner with other parts of the organization to make wins happen jointly across the entire organization, across our customer base as well. So I want to get a quick intro to everybody that's on the call today, to myself. My name is Greg Auxier. I'm born and raised in the state of Utah. You'll see I have two little kids. They're awesome. They're super fun. And I have my beautiful wife. We love living here. Probably done with the cold a little bit. We've been dealing with a lot of snow this year. I think everybody has around the United States. So we're kind of done with that. And I want to get back to warmer times where I can go down to Honduras or other places like you're seeing in that photo. I'm also a big sports junkie. I love golf. But I'm also a huge huge fan of any data point that I can get on. If something can actually help me to better run my day, better run my life, that's going to be a data-informed decision, I want it. So to give you guys a little bit of a story of probably what makes me so data-driven, when I was 8 years old, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And from that point on, I have been living in spreadsheets. I have been living in data analysis ever since that point. So every 3 months when I would go in and I would see my doctor, he expected me to show up with a spreadsheet filled out with at least 2 to 3 weeks of data points, basically saying where my numbers had been, where my blood sugars had been throughout that period of time. So I was doing that pretty regularly, showing up, and he would basically run some quick crunching, and he would look at the numbers and basically say, hey, I'm seeing patterns here. Your numbers are going up way bad in the afternoons. That means that you obviously need more insulin during the afternoon times or something like that. This is obviously advanced a ton. So what you're seeing over here on the right is a really cool application that I get to use every day now that's called Dexcom. Really cool company that essentially feeds me out data and feeds me out reports every day to help me essentially be alerted right in the moment in time when something is either heading up. And then they use data science to essentially say that if I'm dropping, it will actually automatically give my insulin pump information to get me back into correction state. So I've clearly been, both from an accountability perspective and from an ownership perspective, data has been at the forefront of my life for a really, really long time. And so it's kind of funny that like my introduction to Domo was actually just seeing billboards here locally in the state of Utah that made me laugh. I had no idea what they even did as a company. And so when I very first applied, really it just kind of was starting from that. So that's a little bit of my journey. So I've been at Domo now for a little bit over 8 years in multiple capacities, multiple different roles. And I'm really excited to be on here with you guys today. I wanted to show a quick visualization to kind of help you to understand the way that I see the differences between the battle of governance versus self-service, right? There's two sides of every coin, or the way to handle data in an organization. One is to govern data extremely, extremely well, and to make sure that data never gets altered, it never gets manipulated, naming conventions are extremely solid. And then there's the other side of the house where it's, if I hold on to data too tightly, where I don't enable the business to innovate, to ask their own questions, to be able to to be able to go after assumptions and say, I wonder if we did this a little bit differently. What if we looked into this instead of that? And give them the freedom to do that. The things that I've seen happen a lot within organizations when they do governance too far is that naturally what people will do is I start to see that export button get hit a lot inside of the Domo platform or inside of other platforms, where the number one thing that the individual wants to do is that they want to head out of the platform because they want to be able to take other data that they have, or they want to manipulate the data that's in front of them and they just want to go out to an Excel spreadsheet, pivot it, change it, VLOOKUP, something else. And at that point in time, we've lost the entire value of what Domo is, right? Domo is a governance platform. Domo is the ability for us to be able to monitor if somebody builds something that's getting attention, that's getting people's eyeballs on. I want that person to be promoted, and I want that person to be shown how valuable that they are to the company. And I can't do that if I know that they're going offline, right? If they're going out to their desktop and then they're working on spreadsheets or they're working on information outside, I've lost context into that. I want to keep that, right? So how can I basically make these two sides of the coin work together? So first off, I want to hit on data ownership. So data ownership is extremely, extremely important, right? I've learned through my journey here at Domo as an employee and also through Domo customers that somebody needs to be responsible for every data element and for every fact, for every dimension, and needs to understand, why did we decide to do this? Hopefully responsibility is not an individual, it's actually a team and a joint effort, right? That if a metric actually comes down to affecting multiple parts of the organization, that people can come to a consensus of what does that mean. That way, if somebody has something to question, or if they want to call that out in question, they'll be able to stop that. They'll be able to actually go and have a conversation and say, hey, who made these definitions? Who's responsible over this? And they'll know exactly who that tribal knowledge and who that information came from to be able to get back after it. Governance is number two data point that I have on here. Personalized data permissions, making sure that when you create data sets inside of Domo, one of my first things that I've learned to really, really value is the second that I create an asset inside of Domo and I'm not yet ready to share it out with an end audience, I'm still deving on it, I'm still using Sandbox or some other type of mechanism to essentially get me away from my end users that are going to be being involved in that data, is I immediately go in and flip on PDB. The second that I create a new data asset, I want that thing to be governed, and I want it to be controlled down to only my eyes until I'm ready to peel that back layer by layer and go down, making sure that things are accurate and making sure that we're actually getting the impact, that the questions that we want to answer are actually happening. That also goes into security as well, as we want to make sure that we're doing things in a way that we're staying in constant lockstep with our marketing team, our legal team, sales team, and everyone else, that we're making sure that the only people that should see certain information are the people that are agreed upon, that should be able to have access to certain details. And so I really appreciate at Domo, one of the things that our analytics team does a really, really good job of is making sure that they reach out to me and they make sure that I'm actually following these principles and that I'm actually taking care of these assets and making sure that the right data is only getting into the right people's hands for them to be able to do their jobs and do it effectively. Consistency is really, really important as well, right? It's really important. We've had multiple sessions already that we've talked about data pipelines and that we've talked about the quality of data pipelines. We want to find consistency in what we're doing with our data, right? I want to make sure that if one of my leaders needs to know when was this data last updated, when did this data last come in, we need to make sure that there's a level of consistency there, that there's a level of expectation that I can follow through on. And so these things are really, really important. So that way, if somebody walks into a business meeting, that somebody's not showing up with an inconsistent message or an inconsistent level of a comparison, that everybody understands exactly what they're looking at that moment in time. And accuracy obviously is king. We need to make sure that data is accurate. To say that data is perfect is really, really difficult to say. Every company deals with inaccuracies in their data, but rather than avoiding those things, why don't we embrace them as companies, and why don't we embrace them as individuals and build some of our visualizations, build some of our alerts inside of Domo to essentially say, hey, this is a behavior that shouldn't happen, right? When we have information that feeds in from our core systems, let's make sure that we actually call out the things that do look wrong, that actually do seem to be something that we can work on very quickly to be able to correct. That's still another way to be able to use Domo really, really effectively, right? So that's data ownership. This is something that actually took me a little bit of time to come to the light and come to the understanding of, which is really, well, whose data is it, right? When I build an asset inside of Domo, I hate to say the term. I really don't like to say the term, that's my data set. I did that. That's my work. I put that together. I want that data set to be everyone's data set. I want ownership to be across everyone that has a word to say inside of that. And this is something that we've actually learned has gotten adoption really, really well, is that we've been able to figure this message out and figure out the way to be able to say, you know what? It's not my data. Yes, it might have been my hard work. Yes, it might have been my SQL. It might have been my coding, my business logic. However, this is our asset. The more that we feel a sense of ownership around the entire group, the more that those assets will be leveraged and they'll be trusted. And they'll also be able to feel that if something is inaccurate or something needs to be changed, it's not pointing back at the individual that built the pipeline. Instead, it's everybody trying to figure out the problem together as a unit. So we've been able to figure this out and do this really, really well within my organization, within the team that I work with. So let's talk about the other side of the coin, data awareness. So to be pretty honest with you, most of the content that I've built internally has kind of gone through a little bit of a journey. So a couple of years ago, we built it for our own team and for our own organization, a small little neck of the woods inside of Domo that we work with customers. And what we started to realize is that other teams around the globe wanted to gain access to this information and wanted to be able to share inside of that. And there was a couple of lessons learned that now looking back on it, there was things that I wish that I could have done better and that I could have improved upon as we started to share information and got it out to more of an audience. Number one is the thought process around sharing the secret sauce. It's really, really important for me now that when I actually come up with a new concept, I want to make sure that the person that actually is sharing that message is the individuals that have actually helped me in figuring out why would we want to pay attention to that data point? Why would it be impactful? How is it intended to be used? What is the action that you're going to take out of that? And making sure that we're sharing that secret sauce in a way that's effective. The number two thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we're completely buttoned up. And so that way we want to meet prior to actually releasing new assets and think through objections, questions that are going to come, different bits and parts of information that we want to make sure that when the actual end audience gains access to information, that we've already thought through some of the things that actually are going to help them to be best successful and feel at home with that information, that they feel like they can get right to work with it. And then the next thing as well is the tsunami of questions, is just being ready for the questions that are going to come. And obviously I put this down as like, are you ready for the questions? I put it down as a question mark, because the reality is I was not ready for a lot of the questions that were going to come my way. And one of the things that I had to realize very quickly is that I needed partnership from different business units and from different personnel, so that as we would release content, I needed to be able to have people like Braxton over with his team that was willing to go and take more ownership and handle a lot of the objections and handle a lot of the questions that were going to come in to his organization, like Simon that's down in Australia, and other members of the team that are around the globe that I meet with regularly now, that I want them to be able to feel ownership and feel like they can handle the first line of questioning that's going to come in from those organizations. And so I really appreciate that and appreciate their partnership and also their feedback as well, because the reality that we've learned is just because this is the way that I do things doesn't mean that it's the best way to do things. And there's always going to be a different thing that we can learn or do together to make my team even smarter. And so that's where, between collaboration and between best practices, we've gotten so much better than where we were previously. So it all goes back to the same sense of, it's not mine, it's ours. If it's ours, how do we want to improve it together? This is the last point that I really wanted to make today on the call, was to make the wins a joint effort. What I mean by that is that as I build assets or build ideas into our data and build impactful information that's going to be able to help somebody be able to drive their business and drive what they're doing in a better, more effective way, I want the business user to tell that story. In other words, if somebody comes up with a great concept or says, have we ever looked into this before? Have we ever considered tracking this? Have we ever built a variable that said if we ever were to up this ratchet by X%, whatever, I don't want to be the person, even if I'm the one doing the hard work and actually building the logic and building that code in to make it available and make that presentation out there to the globe, right? The distribution. I want them to do that. Why do I want that to happen? Because it's much easier for somebody to look at one of their own peers and say, man, if it's working for that individual, then why can't I get on board as well? And so that's something that we've been able to do really well, is make sure that people involved in the questioning and people involved in that solution are getting the credit that they well deserve for what they're doing. It's a huge important thing for me to make sure that that actually happens, that I don't want any credit or I don't want any ownership of why do we do this? Why do we create this? Why should you care? Why do you want to look at this? And that goes back to making sure that the business and the data side are working in unison, that they're working together. And then let them own it as well. So that way, if questions come back and say, why did you guys consider this? Why didn't you guys consider this? Why did you guys do this instead of this other thing? Instead of feeding those things back to the person that actually is in charge of the code, feed it back to the person that's part of the business unit that actually decided on that. Let them answer that. That way, if somebody comes back with a better way of doing it, comes back with a better tool, a better opportunity, they can take that feedback and then bring it back and say, hey, together we've been discussing, we think we should do this. Then when you make the alterations and you push that out, send it out across everybody. Let them be the owners. A really effective way to be able to do this is I love the fact that Domo has the ability to be able to create content that is not just based on a data set. So obviously I can be able to go in and I can create videos, I can create a Vimeo or create some other type of a video and log it or put it into my dashboard and put it into a strategic location where if somebody says, I don't understand the story here, I don't understand what I'm looking at, use those and use those regularly, as well as notebook cards. If you've not used notebook cards inside of Domo, they tell a really precise story using natural language for somebody to be able to actually say, hey, I can just read a couple of really impactful sentences and get down to the brass tacks of what the rest of this information is going to be delivering to me. So use that as well. And let others know the impact. This has been a huge thing for me as well, as making sure that when I consider changes now, I don't consider the changes only for my own individual team. I now have to consider the changes of how that would affect things for other teams around the globe. And so I feel like I need to make sure that other people are constantly aware of the next impact and the next thing that they'd be able to do with that information. So that's a really huge, important thing for me, is to think of when I push content out, have I already started sculpting the messaging that I can hit deliver and hit promote on that next piece of content, that new addition to a data flow, but I've already thought through the wording before I even did that to make sure that the second that it actually runs, bam, I'm already hitting the buzz stream, I'm already hitting the buzz channel with the exact messaging to say, just added XYZ. I want to make sure that you understand why we just did that. And I back it up with all of those questions and the potential things that are coming my way after that. So with that, I wanted to stop. I know that we're going to have some questions here and that Eddie's going to help us out with a couple of questions that he's probably been getting. But hopefully you all think about this a little bit and think about a little bit of the way that we do things internally and what's working for us, is make other people part of your data decisions. Make other people feel ownership and feel with their own ability that they can take over a little bit more control of what they want to deliver and what they want to be involved in the future. The reality is that this is how organizations get smarter, is that you don't know that maybe one of your smartest data people at your company isn't on your data team. They're doing some role and they're down in the warehouse and they're just super, super smart. And everybody looks to them for, man, if somebody knows how to handle that XYZ thing, it's that person. And even if they're not the data person, they might be able to surprise you, might be able to get there. So that's the real point that I'm trying to make here, is that you'll find those diamonds in the rough all over the place in your business. Just let people be involved in that and you'll find them, and then they'll be able to help you and get you where you want to go.
Yeah, that's so impactful, right? Like just the fact of the passion that comes from people that feel like they are taking ownership of something is extremely impactful and powerful. So I'm glad you spoke to that. So often we do these lunch and learns. I think they're very like heavy clickety click. These are the things that you're doing inside Domo. To take a step back from that and just kind of say, like, here's a very practical example we can give you of ways we're using it as a business and ways we think that it can be impactful in your business is super important. So Greg, I will tell you, so far, we've gotten no comments or questions in. We did get one question from my friend Daniel. Daniel, we are looking into it. We're not quite sure why some of these videos are being restricted, but that has nothing to do with Greg's session. But I am still waiting on a few more. If anybody has any last minute questions, you got a few seconds here of Greg's time before I let him go. But before we do that, as you guys are either looking for questions or kind of finishing up watching us today, let me just preface that we are in our final days of allowing our Domo Community Ovation Awards. These are the first ever Domo Community Ovation Awards. If you know someone or you are someone, it's always good to self-nominate every once in a while, that's been doing some great things with our product, click that QR code, fill out the nomination form. You just have a few more days before we are finalizing the finalists for things like Community Member of the Year, Business Impact Awards, Best Domo Everywhere application, Executive of the Year. These are all really important. There's going to be a really cool awards ceremony and some virtual events leading up to those awards. And we're really excited to offer that this year. It's going to be a thing to kind of jumpstart some of the things that we've been doing in community for quite some time. So, Greg, no comments, which means you did a fantastic job. No questions coming in. We're looking good here. So I think at this point we'll wrap up unless you have any parting thoughts. No, thank you for the time. Appreciate it. Hope I can come back in the future. Yeah, we can't thank you enough. Stick around until after the session. I want to pick your brain before you go. But we'll let everybody else go. Thank you for joining on this Lunch and Learn. Got a little tongue-tied there. If you want to join us again Thursday, 10:30 a.m. Mountain, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, we'll be talking an introduction to Domo's data science services from Florencia. Daniel, he can watch us. He says, thanks, Greg. Really appreciate it. We did. Love it. Thank you guys for joining. As always, you can join us again on Thursday. Tuesdays and Thursdays is when we do these Lunch and Learns. Really appreciate it. We can't wait to catch you on the next one.